Back to Wisconsin, where Governor Scott Walker became the first governor in U.S. history to survive a recall vote last night. Fresh off his recall win is Republican Governor Scott Walker. Governor Walker, good morning, sir.
Hey, good to be with you.
Let me ask you this. What's your mandate? Do you have a mandate, and what is it?
Well, I think it's to move on and move forward. I think, obviously this state had a passionate debate. I think now it's time we woke up. I mentioned to our supporters last night, the election's over. We're no longer opponents in the state. We're Wisconsinites, and I think the real test for us now is to figure out how do we take the successful victory and apply it to getting things done, bringing people together. One of the great things I'm going to do on the social side of things is invite all the legislators, Republican and Democrat alike, over next week for some brats, some burgers, and maybe a little bit of Wisconsin beer to talk about where do we go from here. Because there's obviously been a lot of tension in the state, but I think we can get beyond that if we stay focused on helping improve the environment for small businesses to create jobs and the overall quality of life for all the people of the state of Wisconsin.
Looking back, do you have any regret of being at the issue of collective bargaining itself? That you were getting a lot of you got all the concessions you wanted on the numbers front, but to do what you did on the collective bargaining, any regrets on that front? Because there's still some Republicans who quietly say, you know what, you poked a tiger that maybe looked like you were going for a political kill rather than focusing on the policy.
No, I think in our case, the product itself was positive, and we've documented more than $1 billion worth of savings. In fact, for the first time in 12 years, property taxes actually went down on a medium-valued home. And statewide, we went from a $3.6 billion budget deficit to a $154 million surplus. I think, though, what I would do differently is I'd spend more time last January and early February talking about what we're doing instead of rushing out to fix it. If I had mentioned, for example, last January that before our reforms, most school districts in our state had to spend tens of millions of dollars more than they needed to because they couldn't bid their health insurance out because of collective bargaining, I think most people would have said fix it. If I'd said in the case of, for example, the city of Madison, because of collective bargaining and overtime abuse, a bus driver there made more than $150,000, I think most taxpayers, be they Democrat or Republican, would have said fix it.
So you think you had a communication?
I didn't talk about it.
You believe you had a communication problem when you got into office?
Well, I think that's it. I was so eager to fix it, I didn't talk about it. Most politicians talk about it. They just never fix it. In the future, what I've learned from this is we need to talk about it. We need to bring people into the mix. We need to be transparent and inclusive in the process. And then we still need to go work together to find plans to move our state forward, which I think we can do.
It seems that among the most important voters you had were people that told our exit pollsters that they supported you and that they would prefer the president over Mitt Romney. So there was a chunk of voters that's Democratic voters, or at least voters supportive of President Obama, that also supported you. What do you take from that yourself, and what should Mitt Romney and President Obama learn from that?
Yeah. Well, on the first part, clearly, I think the response, because I heard it. I've heard it for the last couple of weeks overwhelmingly, which is something that really started resonating at the end of the campaign. But I'd hear people come up to me at factories, at dairy breakfasts and other events, and they'd tell me that they were raised Democrat. They'll tell me that they voted for my opponent the last time, but they were voting for me. And the reason they said was because they finally felt someone had the courage to take on some of these really tough issues facing our state when it comes to fiscal and economic crises in Wisconsin. And that even though they didn't agree with everything we did or every step that we took, for them that was important. I think where that goes from beyond just me to the candidates for president, the president himself and Governor Romney, is for either of those candidates to be competitive in Wisconsin. I think they've got to make a convincing case to voters like the ones I just mentioned that ultimately they're going to take on the equally, if not greater, challenges we face as a nation. I think people are hungry for that kind of leadership. They're hungry for people to say, I don't care about the next election. I care about the next generation, and here's what I'm going to do to fix it. And that's what I think people are hungry for.
Look, I know you're a political junkie. You care about this stuff. You look at it as well. Is Mitt Romney still an underdog, given what we saw in the data, what you've seen in your own data, which had you winning, and in those same surveys always having the president leading Mitt Romney?
Well, I think he is an underdog. I think he'd acknowledge he's an underdog, particularly here in Wisconsin. But I think anyone looking at the results last night would also acknowledge that it's now competitive in Wisconsin. It was in 2000. It was in 2004. In fact, in both those elections, Wisconsin was the closest blue state in America. Obviously, It was a blowout in 2008, having then Senator Barack Obama just to the south in the state of Illinois. But I think it will be a competitive Wisconsin, and the key for Governor Romney to be competitive enough to win is I think he's got to lay out a clear platform, something similar to what our friend Paul Ryan has done just down the way coming out of Janesville. And I think if he does something like that and he makes a compelling case to the people of Wisconsin that he's willing to take those kind of risks to get America back on track for our kids and our grandkids' case, he can win.
Governor, very quickly, are you comfortable with all the outside money that came in? Most of it benefited you. Yes, there was outside money on the other side. But in this case, you were the prime beneficiary. Are you comfortable with all that outside money that came in and, frankly, overwhelmed TV stations?
Well, we've got to change the recall process overall. I think most people in my state today wake up saying they don't want to go through this again, be they Democrat or Republican. I think recalls, for most of us here, we think should be about misconduct in office and not just open-ended. And that would change that process because the recall law itself and the portion of the Constitution that enables the recall really allowed for that kind of money to come in. Remember, it's a year and a half worth of an assault that started last February against me. It started out with the national special interest on the left. It finished off with every special interest, right or left, in America seemingly involved in the state. I think now that those interests and those people move on to Florida and Ohio and other states, we get focused on fixing things in Wisconsin. But I think there's just no doubt in the future, people in Wisconsin want to change the law. They want to change the Constitution so that recalls, if anything, are rare, if ever, used in the state of Wisconsin. They're used for things like misconduct. That would change the money. That would change the focus. I think for most of us, that would end these permanent recall elections, permanent election cycles. I think most people are sick of.
All right, Republican Governor Scott Walker, fresh off his victory. It sounds like you're losing your voice, but that's no surprise given all the campaigning you're doing.
But no voice left.
Well, that's what I hear Kugels and Miller Lights are for. Anyway, thank you, Governor.
Thank you.